So we have, our next session we have is a beautiful panel from Roots to Revenue, Scaling Indigenous Tourism. I'd like to call upon Jennifer Pilon to come up and introduce this panel. There is Jennifer, the Director General of Tourism Branch, ISED. Come on, let's give it up one more time. Keep the applause going.
Our story is evolving. Once a grassroots effort, we grow stronger every day. Our mission, guided by the values of our common why, has stretched beyond business. This is more than tourism. This is a movement. Collectively, we continue to reframe perceptions, amplify Indigenous voices, and invite others to see, to connect, and to care for the diverse lands, waters, and skies. Indigenous Tourism BC proudly stands at the heart of these voices, partnering with Indigenous peoples, communities, and businesses to invite the world to experience the brilliance of our ancestors' teachings. Together, we're creating opportunities that honor Indigenous sovereignty and celebrate cultures on our terms, while building a thriving industry rooted in respect, prosperity, and well-being. We are creating something extraordinary, a future shaped by collaboration, guided by Indigenous peoples, and shared with the world. And as our evolution continues, we stay rooted in our beliefs. Everything is connected.
Alors bonjour et merci de l'invitation. Je suis très contente d'être ici avec vous aujourd'hui sur le territoire non cédé des Algonquins Anishinaabe. Comme Steven l'a dit, je suis Jennifer Pilon, je suis la directrice générale responsable du tourisme chez Innovation, Sciences et Développement économique, ou comme on dit en anglais, ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development. It is my real pleasure to be here today to introduce the session From Roots to Revenue, Scaling Indigenous Tourism. The Indigenous tourism industry has tremendous growth potential and is a driver of economic activity and employment for Indigenous communities. The rich and diverse Indigenous tourism experiences throughout the country offer visitors the chance to learn about Indigenous history and culture, thereby fostering meaningful connections and supporting reconciliation. À l'ISDE, notre mandat est d'aider les entreprises canadiennes à croître, y compris les entreprises autochtones et touristiques. Afin de soutenir la croissance de cette industrie, le gouvernement du Canada a investi 20 millions de dollars par l'intermédiaire du Fonds de tourisme autochtone. Une partie de ce financement a été allouée au soutien des expériences autochtones emblématiques, le VTA en français, ou Signature Indigenous Tourism Experiences, sites, comme on dit en anglais, qui sont des offres touristiques autochtones viables, prêtes à l'exportation et soutenues par la communauté et qui attirent des touristes à forte valeur. Ces destinations favorisent non seulement l'augmentation des revenus de ces offres touristiques, mais stimulent la croissance économique en développant autour de la destination des réseaux des petites entreprises locales. Ces réseaux peuvent accéder à de nouveaux marchés, concevoir de nouveaux produits, accroître leurs ventes et créer des emplois à l'échelle locale. I've been at ISED for a number of years and in different positions. When I took on responsibility for the Indigenous Economic Development file in my previous role in the small business branch, NACA was one of, if not the first organization I met with. And on a personal level, I've been really happy to have had the opportunity to work with them in my new role in the tourism branch. I am truly impressed with how NACA worked with key partners to get the program up and running and within the span of a very short few months. Through sites, $9.5 million was provided to 11 Indigenous tourism experiences across the country. These signature tourism experiences include l'Hôtel Musée Première Nation au Québec, Sky High Wilderness Ranch in Yukon, Blackfoot Crossing Historical Park in Alberta, and many more, and we will hear about some of those today during this panel. These sites projects are expected to attract a total of 187,000 additional tourists to Indigenous tourism businesses, boosting revenue streams and creating approximately 200 new jobs for Indigenous peoples and their communities. This demonstrates the huge impact and potential that these types of investments have on communities and their economies. On behalf of ISED, I would like to thank NACA for their work delivering this program in collaboration with key partners. The success of sites in particular exemplifies how collaboration between government and Indigenous communities can drive economic growth. So I'm very much looking forward to listening to the discussion today. And with that, I would like to hand the floor over to the moderator for the panel, Robert Bernard, Executive Director, Nova Scotia Indigenous Tourism Enterprise Network. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Robert Bernard. I'm the Executive Director for the Nova Scotia Indigenous Tourism Enterprise Network. So happy to be here this afternoon to share the important work that we do in Indigenous tourism across the country. This afternoon's panel, I'll introduce them in a second, but just wanted to share a little bit with you about some of the conversations that we're going to have this afternoon. So the Conference Board of Canada, in a study released in January 2025, indicated that more than 2,750 entrepreneurs and organizations were part of the Indigenous tourism sector across Canada in 2023. The Indigenous tourism sector in Canada generated an estimated $3.7 billion in revenues in 2023, directly contributing to $1.6 billion into the GDP and supporting about 34,700 jobs across the country. Including supply chain and induced spending, the sector's total economic impact was $3.7 billion, supporting nearly 54,700 jobs and contributing close to $1.3 billion in government revenue. Although largely recovered from the pandemic lows, the Indigenous tourism sector overall economic footprint remains below pre-pandemic levels, with revenues and nominal GDP down by 8 to 10% respectively. In response to the pandemic, in 2022, the federal government committed $20 million in support of Indigenous tourism through the Indigenous Tourism Fund to help the Indigenous tourism industry recover and position itself for long-term growth. Of this, $10 million in support was provided under the signature Indigenous Tourism Experiences stream, the SITES program. And that was announced at last year's Prosperity Forum. Working with provincial Indigenous tourism organizations, funding was provided to a handful of projects across the country, supporting the scaling up of export-ready, viable and community-supported offerings that draw high value to tourists when they come to Canada. In addition to providing an overview of Canada's Indigenous tourism sector, this panel will explore opportunities and challenges faced by Indigenous tourism operators in Canada and the critical role played by Indigenous tourism organizations in the development of meaningful tourism experiences that respect the inherent rights of Indigenous people and communities, while contributing to the cultural understanding and economic prosperity. A number of these site-supported projects will also be showcased this afternoon. So I'd like to welcome the following panelists to the stage, please, in order. So Kevin Eshkogogan, President and CEO of Indigenous Tourism Ontario. Let's have a round of applause for Kevin. Paula Amos, Chief Marketing and Development Officer for Indigenous Tourism British Columbia. Luke Waskiewicz, Tourism Manager, Wacomico Development Commission. And Mark Rouet, Director General, Hotel et Musée des Premières Nations in Quebec. So, welcome panelists. Feels like test, 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 test. All right, can you hear me? Okay, good. Feels like we're in a newsroom here, Kevin. So we're going to jump right into the conversations. Again, we have what they call the PT, Provincial, Territorial, Indigenous Tourism organizations, but also business owners and economic development projects and community projects, so as business owners. So we're going to start off with the provincial territorial questions, and in the past few years, there's been a growing interest in Indigenous cultural tourism. So your organizations have been engaged in this sector, so Kevin and I do similar work. So Kevin, maybe we'll start off with you. Can you share insights into the opportunities and challenges for Indigenous tourism development in your region? And what kind of services do you provide to support tourism operators in your area, and how have these services helped? And I know we talked about some things and some challenges, so I'll just pass over the floor to you, Kevin.
Yeah, miigwech. Mani bojo gigadon and Indigenous cause the donasing donjaba gnoje do dem. Additional bed nene and Dell. You can all just call me Kevin. That's fine. Insights and opportunities. There's a ton of opportunity. I don't know if we realize it in the tourism industry, but or in our economic development world. But Robert spewed out some numbers. Here's what I know. I'm from Ontario, and I stay in my lane, and I focus on helping Ontario businesses. But there's valuable information there that can be shared with all. And one of the things that we work on is identifying what the opportunities are, and there's plenty of it in Ontario for the businesses that choose to engage. And a lot of businesses will simply enough tell us, or communities for that matter as well, they'll tell us Indigenous tourism isn't for us. And they'll often say things like, you know, how can we be sharing our culture, our traditions, our history with outsiders from international markets when our own children don't know their culture, their history, and their traditions? And from my experience in doing this since 2003, what I have to say to them back, and I've never tried to persuade them to do something they don't want to do, but there's an opportunity there to help our children be proud of who they are. Because for me, when it comes to Indigenous tourism and my over 20 years doing this, there's nothing more amazing to see than our own people sharing who they are very proudly with international visitors, with their own family, with their friends, and anyone else that they engage with. I've got a ton of different stories and examples of people coming to work for us, learning about who they are as, in our case, Anishinaabeg people, and taking that and sharing it with their family and friends and implementing what is now termed cultural revitalization. So there's a lot of opportunity around that, and there's a ton of economic opportunity. For us in Ontario, we contribute almost $700 million to the GDP. There's 700 members of ITO right now. We're going through some important phases of cultural verification and cultural integrity, because that's a huge issue within our industry. It's a big challenge, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for us to correct the direction of the ship, to make sure that visitors who are now much more sophisticated, when they come and see us, they know they want authentic experiences. And when they come here and they get that from us because we've done a good, solid process by the people, they know they're coming to experience that authentic experience, and they're going to go home and tell their friends about this stuff. Because when they come here and they find out, well, I did this Indigenous experience and it wasn't actually an Indigenous person, they go back home and say, yeah, that's just they're a bunch of phonies. And I can say this, from experience. When I used to go to ITB in Berlin, it's a large show, I get asked, tell me something, they'd ask me a question. This is a common thing that happens at these shows. They'd ask me a question, and I'd say, well, this is what I've been taught through my family. And people would often respond to me by saying, that's not what I read on the internet. And you laugh, and it's happened more often than not, and it's kind of crazy, because at the end of the day, we should be telling our stories. And we don't know what's getting on the internet, and it's the grassroots people that should be involved in this. And that's a huge opportunity, Robert, where we can actually share our story on our terms or in our own lines. There's other groups that say it in a different way, but we got to tell our own stories, and this is one vehicle to help that happen.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Kevin. Paula, would you like to answer the same question?
Sure, thanks, Robert. And to build off of what Kevin has said, it's some of the opportunities are, besides the economic and building capacity opportunities that we can do with Indigenous tourism is an opportunity for First Nations communities and Indigenous peoples to create economic sovereignty and present and educate our cultures how we choose to. So we always make sure that our stories are authentic. All of the businesses that we work with are at least 51% Indigenous owned. I've been working with Indigenous Tourism BC for over 20 years, almost 25 years. The OGs, some of the OGs, but so when I first, just like Kevin, when I first started working with Indigenous tourism, going to some of the big shows such as Rendezvous Canada, I would get asked, well, what is the true history of Canada? Is there really a deep history like other countries? And so that really fueled my fire to make sure that our stories are told. So tourism is a great avenue where we can share those stories and educate the visitor, but we get to educate the locals as well, and so that they can share our history as well. So tourism is has a few great areas. Besides the economic driver, we get to educate and connect to visitors and share the stories.
All right, that's great. Thank you, Paula. I'm just going to share a little bit, I guess, from our experience in Nova Scotia and what we're dealing with in terms of, authenticity is a very difficult thing to achieve. It takes a long time. I guess the factors that contribute to authenticity and the cultural loss that's been happening to our people across the country, and a lot of work happens with your elders, and for us, that whole conversation about pan-indigeneity and what is authentic to your people, your songs, your dances, your stories, and making sure that that's something that, as Kevin was saying, like when visitors come here, we want to make sure that those stories are correct. And then working closely with communities and ensuring that, we open opportunities for the people first, and making sure that, we support business growth. The last panel talked about opportunities with, business capacity. And I think that's so huge. And, we talk about, trade missions and all of that, and so many businesses are not ready for that. And I think that's the grassroots capacity is so important, and that's our approach where we are. So the next question. So what level of interest is there from Indigenous businesses and communities to scale up their tourism offerings, so Kevin, to become major attractors in the international market? And can you provide any examples? And what are the biggest obstacles faced by the smaller tourism operators wanting to scale up? So capital, financial literacy.
Yeah, without getting into all of our details on the 4-pillar system that we implement in Ontario, we break it down into really simply, and I'm not going to get into the details for the sake of time here, but cultural integrity is at the forefront, product development, workforce development, and marketing and branding. Those are the 4 things that are critical to growing the sector, or any sector for that matter. Your value's got to be at the forefront. And when we talk about this type of stuff, thankfully we have 2 operators up here that are going to share. They're when they're talking about scaling up, Quebec Tourism is a community-based initiative, and they've been slowly scaling up, but it's been inspiring. So she talked about OGs. I was around when they cut the ribbon for the Quebec Tourism Information Center. And at the time, and I believe it still is, Luke's laughing because that was a long time ago, but he's laughing because at the same time, that's probably still the only tourism information center on a First Nation in Ontario, let alone across the country. I don't know. But with that being said, the operators, because of that system that's there and a local community group leading it, they can then inspire the individual businesses to get engaged. There's also local regional work that needs to be done. Back in the day, we used to have an organization called the Great Spirit Circle Trail that I was involved in. So it would be the community level, the local regional level, a provincial organization like ITO, and then a national organization. So those 4 layers all help inspire everyone of all groups and sizes of business concepts to scale up and grow their business and create opportunity for them.
And that takes time.
That takes time.
Yeah. So Paula, maybe the same question, please.
Another question. Yeah, in BC, we've had over a 40% growth in all of the businesses that we've seen, and those businesses are all from your mom and pops to medium-sized businesses in whether it's resorts, outdoor adventure, cuisine is a big area that we're seeing growth. Right now, the Indigenous tourism industry in BC at a quick glance is 1.1 billion in general economic impacts, and it's around 239.7 million of GDP, 400 plus businesses that we represent, and those are all what we consider market ready and export ready. So Kevin mentioned that there's a 4-tier system. So tier 1s, 2s are your startups, visitor ready, but we want to make sure that they get to become tier 3s and 4s and they're market ready and export ready. And that's when we can bring them out to the Rendezvous Canada shows and ITB that he mentioned. So we are seeing more and more communities that want to scale up. I know with Sites, we were fortunate to have 3 of our businesses supported through the Sites program and enhance their businesses. But we know many communities that have invested heavily into tourism and creating destinations in their communities. So a few of those would be Hawaiian First Nations, which is on the west coast of Vancouver Island. So about 5 years ago, they purchased, it used to be well-known as a sports fishing community. So the Hawaiian First Nation purchased majority of the existing tourism assets. So there's a resort, there is a smaller resort, there's the store, the restaurant. It's a very small community. And so they purchased all of those existing assets and are creating more economy, more jobs for their own community. So we're seeing, that's just one example, but we know of at least maybe 6 to 8 of those communities that are creating destinations in their communities. The other opportunity that we've also seen from throughout the pandemic to now is about 6 to 8 of the communities have purchased existing assets. So it could be a big resort, and now they're going to take that resort and turn it into their own tourism experience. So we've seen about 6 to 8 of those types of scenarios, and how ITBC supports them is we come in and support them to make sure they become market ready and export ready.
Okay, awesome. That's great. So we want to switch the perspective to the business entrepreneurs and the community enterprises a little bit. So I'm going to ask Luke and Mark to chime in a little bit here. So Luke and Mark, so your first question, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, maybe introduce yourself, about your business or organization, and what are the biggest challenges and obstacles to your growth in terms of like the biggest opportunities, and what do you see for your business in the next 3 to 5 years? So I'll get Luke to go first.
Thank you. Kinawea, Apajawachanda Mampi, Nishnabeake, meanwhile, went to go Jikendat. Gidabatanan Gani, we engineer Ode, we Quemkong. Luke Wasagijik Dijnakas, that's my Jaganashish Noswin. Jab Wasage is my Nishnabem Noswin. I'm from the Gigo clan, from the Quemkong unceded territory, and I'm an Odawa. I am the tourism manager for Wakwemekong Tourism. We've not quite an OG like Kevin, but I've been in the industry for about 10 years and have watched it grow. We're very fortunate where we are. We're in a beautiful destination in Ontario on Manitoulin Island. The Wakwemekong Development Commission is our parent company. Wakwemekong Tourism operates as a social enterprise. So under our umbrella, we have our tour services, which services both domestic and European travelers. As well as our newest endeavor, which is the Point Grandine Park, which is one of Ontario's only First Nation owned and operated parks on dedicated reserve lands, on 18,000 acres of land that's dedicated as a wilderness park. There isn't too many models, I know, in Ontario that are modeled after that on dedicated First Nation land. But like Kevin said, what we do on the community level is mobilizing community to reclaim culture, to reclaim stories, to revitalize language, to support infrastructure and community development in our community. A lot of the work we do and a lot of the revenue that we receive and own source revenue goes right back into the community. It goes back as equity into projects in our community. One of the great things in Wequemcong is the community supports that, and just like tourism in a lot of communities, you know, it's a tough conversation, especially tough during the pandemic, right? When we closed the doors to everyone. So with our community, it's been about having a plan that the community could follow and being able to follow that plan over the course of time. And again, to adapt as times change, and we're adapting now with the current economic climate. But you know, for us as a community tourism business, it's really about following that plan and building the economy in our community. One of the biggest opportunities for us really over the next little while is the Point Grandine Park for us. It's really going to be, and it's supported by the Sites Fund, which I'll talk about a little later, but it's really that next signature Indigenous tourism experience in Ontario. You know, it's something that adds to that destination mix in the Killarney region, and it really shows that Indigenous tourism can be a part of that destination mix with the signature Indigenous tourism experience. So, you know, I really look forward to those next steps and the growth in that park, and you know, and the opportunities that are ahead.
All right, thank you, Luc. And Mark, the same question, please.
Thank you, Robert. So my name is Mark Ruet. I'm the general manager at l'Hôtel des Premières Nations in Quebec City. It's a 79-room hotel with small convention meeting rooms. We're right outside Quebec. I'd say about 10 kilometers from Old Quebec City. Well, we're pretty successful because, of course, we're the only Indigenous hotel in that region. And so it gives us a nice opportunity to have visitors as soon as there are meetings or congresses at the convention center in Quebec City. We always have a part of that. And always participate. People come to the hotel and have a nice meal. We just hired, the hotel in itself was built in 2008, and we just hired our first Indigenous chef, originally from Wendake. So that was great. That was great news for us. So we, of course, work with Tourism Quebec also with our marketing plans and everything. Wendake is I'd say about 5,000 population. So we try to hire most of the people from inside the town. I'd say the biggest challenge would be the managers. We have a bit of difficulty with that. I'd say about 65% of our staff actually right now are Indigenous. So we have about 125 people working for us. So yeah, that's.
All right, thank you very much, Mark. And our second question for the entrepreneurs and community enterprises, what kind of support did you get from your regional tourism association, and what else can they do to assist the growth of your business? So, going back to the OG, I guess.
Kevin?
Luc? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, the support is minimal, I think, and that's you know, something that has to be improved. I think RTOs play an important role, but they play only an important role too if Indigenous tourism is part of that conversation, right? And we're at that table. In a lot of places, in a lot of regions throughout Ontario, Indigenous tourism is still in its infancy. Not a lot of communities are mobilized. But there are communities like Quebec Tourism, Six Nations Tourism that are actively engaged in tourism, right? And being able to have a seat at that table and help grow it is something that we strive for. But I mean, in terms of participation or from those RTOs, you know, it's minimal. They do, of course, assist with marketing and travel trade, international travel trade. But again, you know, really the support that's needed is through funding, right? And helping support Indigenous tourism product development.
Yeah, Kevin?
Yeah, I got to jump in because there's some clarification needed, I think, for this sake. So what Luc is talking about is regional tourism organizations. So in Ontario, we have 13 RTOs, and that's what he's referring to. So there's Ontario's, this is the mainstream society and the supports for Indigenous tourism is what he's referencing. So I think you're trying to ask about like the regional tourism associations that are Indigenous, correct?
Well, the question says Regional Tourism Association, so I mean, there's two sides. There's Indigenous Tourism Associations and then the mainstream Regional Tourism Associations. So you were more responding on the Indigenous
On the
side?
mainstream side.
side.
Of course,
okay.
I mean, but
Yeah.
if we're talking about the work and the advocacy work that ITO does, I mean, that support definitely is needed, right?
Yeah.
ITO is that vehicle and that voice for communities, for entrepreneurs to mobilize. They're that advocacy, but even more so, I think, and we leverage ITO for a variety of reasons, for events, for product development, and them having that ability to administer, whether it be federal or provincial funds, and flow them into product development, that's matched with their 4 pillars and their objectives and their deliverables. It helps us a lot. So when ITO is underfunded, it also means communities and entrepreneurs are also underfunded.
Yeah, yeah. So Mark, maybe the same question, and let's talk about the mainstream regional tourism associations and how they've helped you, and then maybe like a QIT and how they're involved.
Well, there's Tourism Wendake, of course, and there's Tourism Indigenous Quebec. So we have a chance to work with both of these, and thirdly, of course, Tourism Quebec. So I'd say we're pretty lucky to have these people work with on a daily basis, and of course there's the internal marketing that we do also. You know, by renewing the hotel the last few months, and we'll be in the you know on certain TV channels, so we're getting funds are there. Yeah, we're really happy about that.
Yeah, and I think it speaks to the ability of either the business owner or the community enterprise and the level they're at and how they're able to access and actually even do some of the work themselves and be proactive too, right? So, yeah, that's great. I'm going to go back to the provincial Indigenous tourism associations. The next question, there are a number of government officials attending the forum today. What message would you like to convey on what is needed from the incoming government to support Indigenous tourism sector? And is there an opportunity for government to better coordinate its programming to support the provincial Indigenous tourism associations and the operators? Kevin.
To me first, can I ask all of the government officials to stand up for a second?
Come on,
Just
there
so I
must be
know,
more.
there's only 2 in the room. Come on, there's got to be more than that. Oh, 3, 4. Oh, they're coming up. Let's give them a round of applause. They're brave enough to stand up and admit they're working for government. We got to acknowledge that. Miigwech, thank you very much for sharing that. So to get to the point of the question, 1, you're valuable allies of ours and partners. So there's a term that some people will use, Indigenous-led, government-enabled, and that's kind of what we're talking about. We need to collaborate. That's our theme for everything that we do. And I want to share some of the, Robert, if I may, some of the examples of the SITES program. Yeah. And it's from my 20 plus years in the industry, the first time that I've seen regional groups come together and handle that kind of money in a proactive way and delivered programming in a fair and equitable manner to operators. And that was led by NACA in partnership with ISET. And that's, trusting in the process, believing in our abilities, and working together. And I got to throw some stats out there because it's quite amazing. So the SITES program gave out $9.5 million to operators across Canada, 10 different projects. That leveraged over $78 million. And there was a demand on that initiative and that project for over $330 million in applications. And we wouldn't be able to do that work if it wasn't for the help of government officials and groups like NACA, who are in the business of distributing resources to grow the economy. Our role is in tourism. We're here to provide support services to the operators. We can work alongside the Indigenous financial institutes to help the operator become successful and grow the economy together. I've got a ton of stories, and I'll gladly share some later if we have time, Robert, about how, we've been here a long time, and if I may, I want to share this one story. Last week, I was at the TIAC, that's the Tourism Industry Association of Canada, Eastern Roundtable. And I had a fellow come up to me, an older guy, his skin was pretty fair, he had white hair, and he had a big smile on his face. Oh man, I'm so glad I seen you. I'm so new in the industry. And you were one of the first speakers I heard coming out of the pandemic. And I said, well, why are you so proud, and what amazed you? And he goes, well, you got up on stage in front of about 400 or 500 people like me, and you said, apparently I said this. Yeah, it's not on video, but apparently I said this, and it sounds like me, so I accept it. He goes, you got up there and you said, you know what, guys, I've come to the realization during our lockdowns that settlers aren't going anywhere. And he was like, I was so proud of you for saying that. And I was like, okay. He didn't tell the rest of it, and the rest of it is, I say that type of stuff because I also say there's no one better to be in Indigenous tourism than Indigenous people. We've been hosting on these lands forever. And what I tell people with the non-Indigenous community is, hey, we need to figure out how to best work together. We need to figure out how to collaborate. So when we're talking about government officials, we need you to play the role and trust us. You've got access to the resources that are going to help enable these initiatives that are proven to grow the economy. So let's figure out what works best for both groups, and more importantly, put the operators first so that they can grow the economy, grow their businesses. Individuals like this are able to make great opportunities happen in their home communities so that our people can tell our story on our terms. It's amazing work to do. It's very rewarding. It's a lot of fun. And I got to leave it with this, Robert. One of the things when we ask, what do we need in the industry? What do we need from government? Here's what I'm going to tell all of you. We've done economic research, and my background's in accounting and business and political science. Never studied tourism a day in my life except for being thrown in and being Indigenous and hosting people on Manitoulin for my entire life, watching my family do it. But I got to say this, our economic report said we need at least 1% of our contribution to the GDP to implement our strategies. So Paula just shared $1.1 billion. Okay, she needs about $10 million to implement her strategy properly to service the community. In Ontario, we need about $6 to $7 million to implement these strategies properly. So when we do this with a strategic manner with key goals in mind, we're going to have success for everybody. Right from those 4 levels, from the business operator to the community, to the regions, and at the national level. But we got to do it together. That's my firm belief on that, and that's the implementation that we try to put within everything that we do with that ITO, and hopefully that resonates with some of the government officials and everybody else in the room.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And yeah, that's a great response there. Tell us how you really feel. No, that's bang on. So Paula, the same question. So what messages do you have for government officials today?
So with Indigenous Tourism BC, there's so many levels of work that we do. So whether it's with Destination BC, the province of BC, the federal government, there's so many levels that we have to work with and partner, build relationships. So we're fortunate in British Columbia. We do have a great relationship with the province, and they've supported Indigenous Tourism BC for over 20 years. Our organization is just coming up to 28 years. So we've been fortunate, and in the last maybe 3 to 4 years, we have been able to leverage dollars, and that's how we've grown Indigenous tourism by 40% in the last few years. But we know longer term, we're always looking at ways, how can we be more sustainable so that we can support our communities and all of the entrepreneurs that want to get into tourism. We've had the 40% growth in the last while, which is a huge growth, and it does put a stress on our small team in BC. And I know that Indigenous Tourism BC, we've been around, we're one of the first Indigenous tourism organizations, but I know all of the Indigenous tourism organizations have similar issues where they need to find ways to be sustainable in the long term if we're going to make tourism a viable economic driver. I think one of the issues that we always have with tourism is sometimes, and even my own communities, over 200 First Nations in BC, for a long time, it took them a while to see tourism as an economic driver. A lot of the focus is on forestry, fisheries, mining, all of the other industries. So in the last while, we are seeing tourism being seen as a huge economic driver, the capacity it builds. But I think the government sometimes don't see tourism as a big player in building economies. So we're always trying to make sure that we do tell that story, that it does build capacity and it does build economies in our communities. So that's one of the big pieces for us.
All right, thank you, Paula. And Kevin mentioned the SITES program. So we were sitting on the SITES advisory committee nationally, and one of the challenges for us in Nova Scotia and the Atlantic region is that we didn't have any companies that fit the criteria to access that funding. So that was a big thing. It was difficult for us to try to, bring companies to that level and to secure that kind of funding. So there needs to also be a focus on the SMEs, the small, medium enterprises, and looking at how we can grow that capacity so we can reach those levels to access. And I think criteria is one of those things that needs to be looked at in terms of like spreading that out in terms of opportunities. So just wanted to throw that opportunity out there to work towards those goals, and maybe conversations with IFIs and looking at those SMEs in terms of supporting the smaller tourism businesses would be a great initiative. So I'm going to switch over to the entrepreneurs again and the community enterprises. So the next question for Luke and Mark. So how does the mainstream tourism industry support the growth of Indigenous tourism, your business, and your region?
Well, I mean, like I said, RTOs are, they're a big support in terms of international marketing, increasing and enhancing some of our digital assets. They fund some programs for some marketing videos and help us with travel trade. So there is some support on that level. For tourism businesses, there really isn't a whole lot in Ontario, I find, from mainstream. And it comes down to overall support and overall government support. I think when you look at community-driven and community-owned enterprises, like Quebec Tourism, right? We're under an economic development arm that's funded at about $500,000 annually. Our tourism budget is $1.2 million. So none of that core funding from ISC is dedicated to tourism. 100% of our $1.2 million budget, where do you think it comes from? It's all own source revenue. It's all community driven. So, I mean, there's a great disparity there in funding for us. Of course, community-owned organizations and enterprises, like I said, they're 100% driven by own source revenue. So again, that support from government in mainstream, definitely needs to be enhanced and definitely needs to be increased. But I think Kevin could answer that a little bit better on what mainstream is doing to support the growth of the industry.
All right, thank you, Luke. And Mark, the same question, please.
Well, we're a hotel, so we try to decorational wise, of course, we hire some people from the local arts. We have a lot of storytelling also in the hotel, museum, the Longhouse. So every day we work on that. I'm not Indigenous, but we hire some people that know the families, the backgrounds, and all that stuff. So that's pretty much how we try to keep up the cultural tourism industry.
Okay, and sticking with Luke and Mark, so the Signature Indigenous Tourism Experience Sites program supported 11 major Indigenous tourism projects across Canada. Your businesses received funding under the Sites program. How will that funding be received in terms of impact for your business and the local economy? So, Mark? Mark,
yeah,
go ahead.
I can start. It was major. It was major. Back during the pandemic, the hotel went from 53 rooms to 79 rooms. So there was an extra 24 rooms that were built, and we were expecting, which we finalized, but we still had 53 rooms to renovate. We had all the furniture and we're in a warehouse and everything, but we just had a lack of funds, and DACA came up. So we were very, very happy. It was a hectic run. It was a short-term run. We had about five to 6 months to redo 53 rooms. We were really, really well supported by NACA, of course. I spoke to, I don't know if Mr. Lamotte is here, Fabien Lamotte is here, but we spoke with this person on a daily basis, and the follow-up was great. So now we have a brand new hotel, 79 beautiful rooms, which the hotel is auctioned actually right now. So if some of you want to participate in this auction and have a two-day stay in Quebec City, you're welcome. But NACA was great. We won the lottery. Thank you.
All right, and Luke?
Yeah, first off, we're grateful for the support of for the Sites Initiative, the Sites Fund, and NACA. For our project, again, I could sit here all day and talk about it. They help support the Point Grandine Park. For that project, I've never been involved in such a complex project that meant jumping over bureaucratic hurdles, politics, and policy. I've been involved in this project since its infancy. Point Grandine Park was a vision of our council through a land claim back in 2001. So part of that was developing an ecotourism initiative in the community through these settlement lands. So we received over, I think it was 36,000 hectares of land. So that vision started way back then, well before my time, but I took it over, the file over in about 2012. And when we first took over that file in 2012, one of the biggest challenges that the provincial government looked at us, that we were competing with their crown jewel, which was the Killarney Provincial Park. And there was not an appetite at the provincial level to fund the project. They simply seen us as a competitor. So over the course of 5 or 6 years, I've had to jump over hurdles, create MOUs with Ontario Parks that showed reciprocal benefits, that showed we were actually a part of that destination mix, and jump over those hurdles. Fast forward to 2020, we finally received some support from both the federal and provincial government. In the tune of about 1.1 million. And then fast forward to last year with the Sites Initiative. And going through COVID, we first started with the Point Grandine Park project at a $3.5 million project. Through COVID, jumped to an $18 million project at its full scale. So we had to reduce that scale and navigate through that. So during that time, from 2020 to 2023, we were essentially kicking a dead horse with no funds, with old agreements that were made during COVID. And then, we received the NACA funding last year. And you talk about what that funding did in terms of leveraging additional funds. Our project is now $10.5 million. That $1 million from NACA now has turned into $5.5 million that we were able to leverage, and another $2 million in queue from both provincial and federal sources. So for me, we finally see the finish line. It's a project that I've been involved from day one, and we finally see that finish line. So again, what that means to us, of course, we can finish this project. We know when we know our construction work plan for the next 2 years. We're able to prepare. We're able to get that product market ready, get it to international markets, and get ready to open our doors and welcome visitors. But more importantly, that product now is going to be a signature experience that's going to add to that destination mix in the Killarney region, right? And it's going to make it one of the best and one of the biggest products, honestly, in Ontario in terms of from an Indigenous tourism lens. So, the sites funding definitely was welcomed in the community, and like I said, helped leverage, millions in federal and provincial funds.
Okay, that's great. And it's so important, like people just don't realize how much, that can open doors and create more investments into projects and business offerings. So we're gonna move in, we have about 8 minutes left, so we have a couple of questions left here, maybe really quickly. Where do you see Indigenous tourism in the next 10 years for your region? Kevin, Paula?
Well, hopefully, and again, this is me putting my hat on, if you're relying on hope, you're probably got a lot of hurdles ahead of you. But I'd like to see, Ontario specifically, because you're asking about just Ontario. Yeah. I'd like to see us, growing our economy. To be quite frank, Paula and ITBC, in my humble opinion, are the leaders in Indigenous tourism, definitely in Canada. I can't speak for the rest of the world because I try to stay local, but I would say Canada for sure. I know Quebec would say something about that, so would Ontario, but they're doing a lot of things that we're striving to do. So that tells me they're a little bit further ahead, and they've had great investments made into their industry. I'd like to see us all along par with what they're doing, and all of these different regions, because it's not just two regions doing this work. There is groups all across the country doing this. I'd like to see all of us supported better so that we can do this good work with the operators, and people have taken on a different mindset to grow the economy collectively.
All right, thank you, Kevin. And Paula?
Thank you, Kevin. I think we've been plugging away at this for so long to bring Indigenous tourism and see the growth that we're seeing now. But where would we like to see Indigenous tourism in 10 years? I think we've achieved a lot over the last 20 years, but we have great partnerships and collaborations in BC, so we're fortunate. So what we've been striving for is making sure that Indigenous people, First Nations people in BC, our identity is at the forefront of anything tourism in British Columbia. So Supernatural British Columbia is the main brand in British Columbia, but we're making sure that our identity is woven into that brand, and we're actually at par with Destination BC. So they see us now as an equal partner, and it's taken a while for us to get there. We're working throughout all of the province, over 200 nations, making sure that our stories are woven into the brand, the identity in British Columbia. So that's a big piece for Indigenous Tourism BC. The other big piece too that our nations are always looking at is they want to make sure that they have signage. They want their territory to be acknowledged. We're seeing more and more place names being changed and going back to our original names. So we're excited for some of these pieces to be coming together, but we still have a bit of a ways to go, but I'm excited for the next 10 years because of these great relationships.
All right, thank you very much. And Luke and Mark, next 10 years.
Next 10 years? Well, I think for us in Indigenous Tourism in Ontario, I think it's, ITO is doing a great job at building the brand, building the industry in Ontario. For us in our community, it's continued to grow. Of course, we have to diversify based on the economic climate currently that we're in. I think there's some positives there. I think in terms of domestic travel, we just need to continue to stick to our plan, continue to follow it, and continue to build on opportunities like our park at Point Grandin.
All right, thank you, Mark.
Well, we still need to have access to capital, of course, to improve our infrastructures and all. But I've noticed, the last few years, I've done a few Rendezvous Canada, and the Indigenous tourism is very, very present now. So I guess it's in the next, few years, it's still going to continue to grow. And the main challenge, I guess, is the staff in our hotels. That's pretty hard, but as long as we keep talking about it and giving the nice feedbacks, I'm pretty positive about the next 10 years.
That's great. Just from my perspective, next 10 years is, sustainable funding, core funding, staff that's going to be there and be able to deliver programs for our communities and our businesses, and just, not having to spend a lot of time negotiating, and you spend more time in building. So that's just my 2 cents. And Kevin, last messages. What do you have for those in the room today? What kind of message in terms of economic reconciliation, and any closing thoughts?
I'm going to keep this really short. So I mentioned the 1%, and if you want to talk about this more with me later, I'll gladly have a conversation. But here's what we need to think about really simply around the 1%. If we gave 1% of the contribution of the tourism industry back to the industry, it only amounts to about $24 million a year. And the return on that is 100-fold. So if we're looking at final thoughts on things that we need to do, giving back to the industry so it can grow makes a whole lot of sense. And the last thing I want to add is simply this. Point Grandin Park and Killarney Provincial Park and them working together is an example of mutually beneficial mindsets. As I said in that story earlier, we got to figure this out. We got to figure it out by having mutually beneficial mindsets, where we're working together so that one side of it is not benefiting more than the other. And we're in agreement to this. Sound like a familiar story? Comes from the treaties, right? One side's not being honored. It's really that simple. That might be controversial for some, but that's the reality. And at the end of the day, if we did things in a fair and equitable manner for both sides of that equation, we'd be in a much better place, and it starts with having a mutually beneficial mindset, in my opinion.
All right, that's great. Paula, really quickly, final thoughts?
Economic reconciliation and prosperity are always at the top of mind, as well as sustainability, to make sure that we can do the work that we need to do for the longer term with all of the nations and Indigenous communities. I think one thing that always stands out to me is going back to the 2010 Olympics, and in BC we've been able to use big events to make sure that we are on that world stage. So Chief Ian Campbell, back when 2010 was coming to Vancouver, he had said, we're no longer going to be invisible in our territories. We want to make sure that we take our rightful place in our communities. So that's always stuck with me, and we've been fortunate to be able to make sure that we're not just window dressing. So we're going to make sure that we're benefiting economically, building capacity for the long term. So that's where.
Awesome. That's great. Luke, last thoughts?
I think this morning in the address by the National Chief, she said it best, we have to diversify our economy. And I think Indigenous tourism has to be part of that strategy. I think that's the big part of that economic reconciliation. But when we look at reconciliation as a bigger part of tourism and what that means, Kevin said it, well, we were the original tour guides, but Indigenous tourism, it's about the people. That's the fabric of Indigenous tourism. And reconciliation as a larger part to us in the tourism industry means about changing colonial narratives, shifting those narratives, building collaboration, and sharing our stories. But when we talk about economic reconciliation, what that means is Indigenous businesses being a part of that dialogue, being a part of that conversation, and doing it in collaboration with investment from mainstream. Really, that to me means, is a big part of what economic reconciliation is, and that it goes to support those youth, like that young boy that was here that Stan pointed out, so that he can share those stories, so that he can reclaim those stories and share those stories with his children. That's what economic reconciliation, it's about sharing those original stories from the original people of this land. Amigwech.
Thank you, Luke. And Mark, last thoughts?
7 seconds, so
don't worry about that.
I'll invite you guys to come over. You could stay asleep at my place. So, so Quebec's a very nice, of course, province area. So thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mark. And everyone, can you please join me in thanking Kevin, Paula, Luke, and Mark this afternoon.